President Trump. Alyssa, thanks for coming on. I know you just got married. Congratulations for that. So let's talk about the news that just happened. You stepped down about a month before the attack on the Capitol because you were uneasy about the administration's peddling of the big lie. Steve Bannon, as we know, was a shameless proponent. What was your reaction when you heard that Bannon had been indicted?
Well, the first thing I tweeted was wow, because I was surprised that the Department of Justice actually moved so quickly, but it's a good thing. Congressional oversight needs to matter, and some of the people currently who are defying congressional subpoenas themselves have in the past said how important the power of the subpoena is. So you've got a lot of people hiding behind what I would say is very murky executive privilege. So I'd remind you, in 2018, Steve Bannon was fired by President Trump after leaking to Michael Wolff and Fire and Fury. And at that time, Donald Trump put out a statement saying not only did he lose his mind, not only did he lose his job, he lost his mind. So why Republicans are now falling on their swords to defend this man who perpetuated the myth that led to January 6th, who's been a thorn in the side of the party for nearly a decade now, is just beyond me. But more importantly, I would say this is a sign that the January 6th committee means business. They will not put up with people defying congressional subpoenas, and I think this could be the first of several indictments.
And you've met with them voluntarily. Mm-hmm. Tell us what that was like. What were they focused on with you? What can you share about what you told them?
So this is going to be a very comprehensive and deliberative process. They've already talked to over 150 witnesses. And while I don't want to speak for the committee, what I found is I think they're looking for two main things. They want to put together the definitive narrative on the big lie, how people contributed to it, how people perpetuated it, who, by the way, knew it wasn't true. So that's why these witness testimonies under oath are going to be so important. Asking some of these people who went on cable news and said the election was stolen. Well, under oath, they're going to say something a little different if they care about the rule of law. So putting that together, and then there's going to be the criminal justice side of things of was there wrongdoing, was there tampering within the Department of Justice or with state governments to overturn or push to overturn results. That's something they're all looking into, and I trust the work that Ranking Member Liz Cheney is doing, and I think it's going to be extremely important going into the next election cycle.
So let's talk about Mark Meadows, your former boss, former chief of staff under Trump. How might this Bannon indictment influence him? Of course, he didn't show up for his deposition with the committee yesterday. What do you think? How do you think this is going to play with him?
Listen, Meadows has a much better argument for privilege than Steve Bannon does, who wasn't in the White House for several years. That said, much of what they are asking Mark Meadows for would not fall under executive privilege. So let's keep in mind, January 6th was a campaign rally. It was talking about overturning the election results. It was not official office capacity of the president or of White House staffers. So any planning and coordination around it, by my understanding, would fall well outside of the realms of official White House business. And if it didn't, I would argue that's a huge Hatch Act violation, but there's communications about whether you're using a personal device or an official device. There's plenty of bandwidth and leeway here for where the committee can simply just try to get information, and I'm hoping this indictment will encourage people like Mr. Meadows to simply cooperate. Congress is a co-equal branch of government. All of us who collected White House taxpayer salaries knew that we had an obligation to answer to the public on what we did when we were in office.
What do you make of him defying this deposition, not showing up and so forth?
I think for a lot of folks, they genuinely don't realize they're not in power anymore. So a lot of that confidence that you might have from knowing that you've got a lot of authority on your side when you're in the White House, you don't have anymore. You have to answer to the powers that be. And by the way, as conservatives, as a Republican who believes in the rule of law and the co-equal branches of governments, I find it appalling that a former White House official would defy a congressional subpoena.
It's interesting you say that too, because Trump has acted like he's still president, right? I mean, convening his cabinet, so he said. I want to talk about this Jonathan Karl interview with Trump, with the former president, about Mike Pence. This is in an interview with Karl. Former President Trump appeared to defend the people threatening Mike Pence when they were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." Let's listen.
Were you worried about him during that siege? Were you worried about his safety?
No, I thought he was well protected, and I had heard that he was in good shape. Mm-hmm. No, because I had heard he was in very good shape. But no.
You heard those chants. That was terrible. I mean,
he could have. Well, the people were very angry.
They were saying, "Hang Mike Pence."
Because it's common sense, John. It's common sense that you're supposed to protect. How can you, if you know a vote is fraudulent, right? Yeah. How can you pass on a fraudulent vote to Congress?
I mean, obviously he is defending the indefensible, but you were Vice President Pence's press secretary. What was your reaction when you heard that?
Well, it's comments like that that will never make me feel bad for never again defending Donald Trump, because as you said, it's completely indefensible. But interesting thing about the point that he made, there was an onslaught on the Capitol, and there were hundreds, if not thousands of people inside that Capitol who didn't have security details. So while he may point to the fact that Mike Pence was fine because he had Secret Service, what about the other 535 lawmakers who don't all have security details? It was fine that their lives might be threatened because of this. It's just, it's absurd, it's indefensible. And I have to hope that conservatives and Republicans of good faith hear things like that and say, we don't need 4 more years of this man.
So Trump, though, is someone who, as we know, he makes decisions out of personal grievance, no matter what, no matter the consequences of that. Did you see that? I mean, you were in the White House. And so in some ways, you see how Trump has taken this big lie so far for his own ego. Is it surprising to you, or is it just more of the same of what you saw in the White House?
It's a little surprising how far it's gone to me. Just to be honest, I mean, I've said it before, I knew that he knew he lost at one point, but he has surrounded himself by people who are going to tell him what he wants to hear. And this goes back to why the report that the Congressional Committee is doing is so important, because they will systematically dismantle the big lie. So they're going to put up statements from the people who are still in the president's ear saying it was stolen, who still go on cable news saying it was stolen. And let's see if they say that under an oath, because I know most of those people are smart enough to know that that's not true. And they're simply telling him what he wants to hear. And just on like a personal note, if you even care about the man, if you care about the former president, which I at one point did, be honest with him. That's what almost offends me about this, is lying to this man and helping him perpetuate this myth that has just dismantled his legacy. But it's kind of shameful.
But I mean, isn't Trump responsible for his own?
Well, of course, he certainly is.
I mean, like, doesn't he knows? He knows.
Honestly, I'm not sure.
I know he wants to protect his ego at all costs, but I mean, Trump has to know he lost, because I remember at the time talking to folks in the White House saying, yeah, he knows that he lost. He's just, coming around to it. And
he knew. He told me shortly after that he knew he lost, but then folks got around him, they got information in front of him, and I think his mind genuinely might have been changed about that, and that's scary, because he did lose, and the facts are out there, and they've lost every court case. They've had countless times to prove any sort of fraud and haven't been able to, so it is actually kind of more scary that he believes it.
So why did Pence talk to him after this? I mean, that was something as just an observer, here you have protesters chanting, hang Mike Pence, and all this going on, and yet they still talked after the insurrection. Why is that? What do you make of that?
So, to the best of my knowledge, I think Pence, by default, is somebody who's very deferential to both the chain of command and the institution of the presidency. And I think he would always take a call from Donald Trump. He would always take a meeting if one was requested from him. I think that those must have been very awkward and tough conversations. I've always known Mike Pence to be a person of deep character and conviction, so I don't doubt that in those private communications, he communicated how bad that was and how inappropriate it was, but not for him, but for the country. But yeah, I can't imagine that was a comfortable conversation, and I think that you're going to see a bit more distancing as time goes on. Look, there's aspects of the record they did together that I know Pence is proud of, but I know he is ashamed of that day. He's ashamed of how the former president conducted himself.
So we expect that Donald Trump will run again for 2024. Do you think that Pence will run against him?
So I think he will, and I'm saying this with no knowledge outside of, any special knowledge on it.
But it's informed speculation, let's be honest.
I do think that there's this belief that people are just going to clear the field for Trump. I actually think some folks are teeing up to run. I think Pence could be one of them. I think DeSantis might be one of them. I think Mike Pompeo is looking at a political team and what that could look like. And it's a good thing for the party. A coronation of Donald Trump would be the worst thing both for the party, but more importantly for the country. So we're going to need to have out these debates on the stage, by the way, of was the election stolen? And that's going to be a tough question for some of these folks to answer, because some have really towed the line of the big lie. So I'd love to see some folks run who are going to acknowledge the truth and the reality and actually just try to win over more voters.
So you do think from your perch, which is a good perch because you used to be press secretary for Pence. You think he will, from your view. What makes you think that? And what do you think